talk about reflecting the divine. And we'll get into why I chose that title. But the quote underneath that, I think, is a very powerful quote. It says, what comes to our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about you. You know, I have a coworker who is secular. He says he doesn't have any religion. His thoughts of God are pretty much, I am God. That's how he would think. He is God. And that's the important part about him, because he thinks he can do no wrong. He thinks he can pretty much live the way he wants to, because he sees himself as God. Some people see God as a powerful, scary force, and they live in fear all their lives of this God. Also, again, a very important thing about them, the way they see God. So the way we see God, what we understand about God, our thoughts about God when we think about Him, are a powerful thing about how we live our lives and what we think in our lives. So yeah, what comes to our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about you. I don't care what your height is, how tall or short you are, your color of skin, it doesn't matter. What's most important is what you think about God. That will dictate everything you do in your life. So we've got a couple life questions we're going to look at this morning. First one, what is God like? If we want to have good thoughts about God, we have to know what God is like. Second one, what is my purpose in life? That's a question that's one of the three worldview questions that everybody answers. What am I here for? What is my purpose in life? And the third question is, why is there pain and suffering in the world? That's a question a lot of people think a lot on. Why is there such pain? Why do we have pain? Why do we have suffering? And that's some questions that we're going to tackle this morning. Scripture text, we're not going to look at all these, at least not in depth, but that's the background text. Genesis 1 through 5, verse 3. So the first three chapters of Genesis is what we're pulling a bunch of thoughts out of. Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14 are two other texts that we'll be pulling a little bit from this morning. So if you want to read those outside this morning, that could help you with the morning. Let's start off with the beginning. Genesis 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. That's all it says. It just says, in the beginning, God. And then he starts to create a masterpiece. There's lots of masterpieces around us. There's a couple here. Masterpiece up front. There's some more pictures. They're masterpieces. Somebody put a lot of work into creating those masterpieces. But in the beginning, God creates his masterpiece. And you can take the most beautiful work of art you can find, most in-depth masterpiece, and it doesn't even come close to the masterpiece that God created in this earth. In scale or in complexity, nothing comes close to the world when God was creating his masterpiece. How does he create it? First of all, he creates the earth in a precise, orderly masterpiece. I don't know how many of you like modern art. Anybody like modern art? But you can't tell what it is, it's just kind of a bunch of colors? Not so much me. It's disorderly to me. It doesn't have any rhyme or reason. It's just a bunch of abstract nothingness in my mind. Not God. God creates his universe in an orderly masterpiece. And that's something to keep in mind. Also, the account of creation in the Bible is very different than the accounts of creation that other people in the time of Moses wrote the book of Genesis, that other people groups in that area would have had. We have a couple of those creation accounts. The Epic of Enlil, I think is how it's said, is the Babylonian account of how we got this world. Every culture has an account, you could say a myth or a story, to define how the world came into creation and into existence. And the Bible is no different. It has an account. But this account is very different than any other account you find in any other culture. Every other culture, it was a chaotic rebellion or a war, and then one of the gods created the world out of this war. The Babylonian account was one of the gods killed another god, and they took his body that they killed and they divided up and threw it into space, and one part became a moon, another part became a planet, another part became stars and the earth, and it's just out of this war that the world was created. No, God instead takes something. So these other people, these other creation accounts, they take something that was working and they just reform it. They cut it all up and they throw it out there, and then we have something new. In God's account, we had something that was not working, and he built something out of that. So from chaos to complexity, the other accounts all go from complexity to chaos to complexity. Okay? So it's a little different there. That's one thing that when you read the different Christian accounts, this thing stands out. First of all, we're going to talk about, before we talk about the creation of the world, we're going to talk about the creation of angels and spirits, or Satan. The most important one here is probably Satan. But anyway, in Ezekiel 28, Lucifer, or Satan, was created. And probably that's when all the other angels were created. We don't really know exactly when all this happened because the Bible doesn't give us a lot of information on it. And a lot of what we find, a lot of what you read on the creation of spirits and angels is made up. So let's take what we know, and the things that we don't know, let's leave it at that. But we see that Satan, or Lucifer, was created. And he was created with a purpose. Not for evil, but for good. He was beautiful. He was perfect. And he was in the presence of God. He was one of God's created workers to fulfill God's creation. But what happened? Well, we see here in Isaiah, he talks about Lucifer's fall. Lucifer was how he was created. His name was then changed to Satan. But Lucifer's fall, he said, I will ascend into the heaven. I will increase my rank. Another way you could write that. I will increase my rank. I will become more important than what I am now. Number 2, I will exalt my throne above the other stars. Stars is defined as angels, and some translations even say angels. I will exalt my throne above the other stars of God. I will be higher than all my fellow created beings. There is a class of angels. And Lucifer is one of that class. And he says, I'm going to be the greatest among all of them. Okay, but then he takes one step farther. He says, I will become like the Most High. I want to become equal with God. That was where he really fell off the wagon. First 2 areas, I will increase my rank. Okay, well, he's still inside his rank. I will increase my rank. I will exalt my throne above the other stars. He's still an angel. But then when he says, I will become like the Most High God, he is declaring mutiny on God. Now, a couple weeks ago, it was all the news about a mutiny in Russia. You know what I'm talking about? You all read that? And what happened? The mutiny lasted for like 24 hours, shot down a bunch of planes, a bunch of people were killed, and then the mutiny ended. And when it was heading the mutiny, ran off to another country. Everybody else kind of disbanded or went back to where they were from, or we don't know where they're all at this point. But that is a mutiny. This is a mutiny too. And Satan says, I'm going to rebel against God. I'm going to become like the Most High. I'm going to create another alternative. If you don't like that government system, you can join mine. That's what Satan's saying. You can join mine. So he declares another ruling system. Because he was attempted to ascend up to God, he is struck down in verse 15. And if you want to read that whole account, you can read the whole thing, but this is just a synopsis of it. Again, this is a survey, so we're doing a flyby by 10,000 feet. We're not going to get into depth on anything. So that's the history of Satan, how he came into existence. Satan's desire to be like God and ascend above his created place was his downfall. He was created for a purpose. He chose to take another purpose, and that was his downfall. When he stepped out of his place and he goes his own way, he could no longer be an agent of God. You can't be under somebody and also in active rebellion to that being. And Satan could not be under God, but be in active rebellion to God. It can't work. You have to choose to be under something or replace that something. And Satan chose to replace. Satan could not serve God and himself at the same time. And when he decided he was going to be like the Most High, this led to his downfall. Because no longer could he serve in the position that he was intended to serve, what he was created to serve. And so it'd be like taking something that was designed for one thing and try to do something totally different with it. It's not going to work well. I have a little model tractor, and I wish I would have been bringing along what's in Pennsylvania right now. But my grandfather made it. It has a couple hundred pieces of wood in it. It's not designed to go plow a field. It's not designed to play with. It's designed to look at. And if you take this little model tractor and say, well, it looks like the real thing, let's take it out there and see if I can plow a garden with it. Or you're going to break off the hitch, you're going to break off the wheels. Or you said, hey, it looks like a toy. Here, 2-year-old, why don't you play with it? Well, they're going to destroy it. It's designed to put up on the shelf and look at. And when you take it outside of that place it was designed for, you destroy it. Satan stepped outside the place where he was designed for, and it destroyed his purpose that he was designed for. We'll see that happening again very quickly here. Now we get to the creation of man and women. And if you read the first 25 verses, you see the creation of the world. We're just going to skip over that part. Probably most of us have heard that before. If you want to read on your own, go read on your own. We're going to focus in on humanity, on man and woman. Verse 26 and 27 of Genesis, I think, are my favorite verses. And I quote them all the time. God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and over all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. And so God created mankind in his own image. And in the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Now, this might seem very simple, but those two verses there are the answer to most of life's questions. First question you deal with is, where did I come from? We got it right there. Second one is, why am I here? That's also right there, if you look a little deeper. So the first two questions, worldview questions, is where I come from and why am I here? And they're both answered in the first chapter in Genesis. I think God's thinking, people are going to have these questions. I'm going to put the answers to these questions right in the beginning of my word to them, so they'll at least get that far in their morning devotions. I mean, you might not get to chapter 2, but at least you get through chapter 1 sometime in your lifetime. And so he puts the answers to those two questions right there. Okay, chapter 2, it goes a little more definition, a little more description of how woman is created. In chapter 1, it's talking about mankind, women and men together. So chapter 2 is a little more information on how women came about, and that the main purpose of chapter 2 is to understand that man was not able to reflect God and represent God adequately. And so women, females, were created to help in this huge project of reflecting and representing God. We can go a little deeper, but we're going to skip over that. At the end of their creation, God says they were doing a good job. He says it is very good, his creation. They're doing a good job. Don't we all want to have God look at us and say, good job? I think that's what everybody's seeking for, to have the ultimate being in the universe look at them and give them a thumbs up. And God's looking at his creation saying, good job. You're doing what I designed you to do. When we do what we're designed to do, things work well. When that tractor, I wish I had here to show you, does what it's designed to do, it attracts a lot of attention. Most people that walked in our house, we had it on display in Hamilton, and most people that walked in saw that tractor and they comment on it. Or some of the other things that I had in there, in that cupboard. When you do what you're created to do, it works well. When you do what you're not created to do, things fall apart very quickly. If I go try to open up a doctor's office, you don't want to come to my doctor's office. And likewise, if Matt decides he's going to open up an HVAC business, you probably don't want to call it. Flip houses, yes. Probably not going to work so well. If you do what you're designed to do and what you're gifted in doing, it works much better. So God is giving us a job, and we need to figure out what the job is. First of all, created in the image of God. The image of God reflects two things. One is reflecting God and representing God. Okay? And you'll hear that in the next couple of weeks, reflecting God and representing God pretty often. Image of God. When you look at a mirror, I think I have it here. You look at a mirror, you see a reflection of yourself. Is it yourself? No. It's a reflection of yourself. We were meant to reflect God. We are not meant to be God. Satan's problem was, he said, I will be like the Most High. When he says like, he's not saying a reflection of God. He's saying, I will become equivalent to God. We try to become equivalent to God is where we get into trouble. We're supposed to reflect him. We're not supposed to be equivalent to him. Man is best fulfilled when they reflect God's character the clearest. So what does it mean to reflect God? Well, in Genesis 5:22, we have the gifts of the Spirit. And these are the ways that we are created to reflect God. Fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's a pretty good list of what it means to reflect God. Those are all attributes or character traits of God. And those are all attributes or character traits that we can reflect in God. When we do that, then his creation works well. But if you look at the inverse of those, you could say maybe the fruits of Satan, or the fruits of those who do not want to serve God, are not love but hate, not joy but despair or sorrow, not peace but war, not long-suffering, and that is could be patience, you could say there, but angry and patient, not kind but kind of mean, not good but evil, not faithful but irresponsible, not gentleness, rather harsh, and not self-control, but somebody who just lives for their own passions. Isn't that what we see in the world around us? Most people actually follow the opposites of the gifts of the Spirit rather than gifts of the Spirit. And then we wonder, why is the creation not working well? God made it work well. Why is it not working well? Because we're not reflecting God. Can you pull up the other picture? The one about Cincinnati?
So you can just leave that on there, you know.
Just switch the... I'm going to pull up the background. You've all seen this picture numerous times because it's the background for Matt's... the background was desktop. But it's a picture of Cincinnati. And in the bottom of that picture, when it comes up here, HDMI 1, there we go.
So if we flip over to HDMI 1, it should be there.
Right here. Do you see this bridge here? Does that bridge look at all familiar to anybody? Anybody ever see that bridge out? I mean, Beth have obviously seen it. Anybody else see that bridge? Does it look familiar at all? What does it look like?
It's like the Brooklyn Bridge.
It looks like Brooklyn Bridge. Now, what can you tell me about that bridge? Let's talk about the person who made that bridge and designed that bridge. What attributes could you say about the person who made that bridge? What are some things you think about when you see a bridge like that? What are their skill levels? What's their qualities in life?
Artistic.
Artistic?
It's like a straight line.
They could have just made a
Yeah.
silly looking bridge. No, it looks like it's a pretty neat looking bridge. What else?
Smart, hard work,
Smart, hardworking.
organized,
Okay.
skillful.
Skillful.
They understand math and engineering.
Mm-hmm. Experience. This was actually a test bed for the Brooklyn Bridge. He designed, they wanted him to build a bridge in Brooklyn, and he said, nobody's ever built a bridge even close to the size that we need to build this here. And so he also knew that Cincinnati needed a bridge, and so he came with his design, built a bridge in Brooklyn, tested it out, made it work, and then times it by 3, and built the one in Brooklyn. Brooklyn Bridge. This is a 1/3 size model of the Brooklyn Bridge. So, it's the same person that built both bridges. Do you think he got some experience in this one for the next one? Absolutely did. But we can see a lot about the person who created the bridge just by looking at the creation. And you can also see a lot about the person who created this world by looking at the world. You can find out. It's called natural theology, or using nature to understand the world. You look up in the sky at night times, you look at all the stars. That tells you a lot about God. A lot about God. His power, his organization. You don't get the Big Dipper by accident. I don't care how randomly you throw stars in the sky, you're not going to get the Big Dipper. Or some of the other pictures in the skies. It has to be an orderly God who creates that. Okay, let's switch back to my computer. And then just go back to, there we go. So representing God, or reflecting God, We can learn a lot about God by looking at his creation, but then we can also see from Genesis or Galatians 5 what it means to reflect God. That's only half of it. We're created to reflect God. Okay, it says that. The other thing we're created for is to represent God. We are supposed to represent God as rulers or ambassadors sent from the King of Kings. The ultimate ruler selects mankind to rule in their stead. Now, this is a quote coming out of a textbook that I had in college. The idea of image signifying dominion was part of the ancient Near Eastern idea that statues or images of a king could be used to mark or define the realm of his domain. It is in this sense that humankind is the Creator's royal representatives, rulers on earth. God's beings, human beings, are the Lord of creation because they're specially created in the image of God. A little bit of history on this. When you decided what king you wanted to follow, it was not territorial. It was by who you decide you were going to follow. And you would take a little image of that king and set him in your front yard or on your mantle so everybody would know what king you are following. If I was going to say I'm the king and I was going to send Mike over to Miami to be an ambassador for me, I would send with him a little idol or image of myself. And this meant that what Mike says while he's in Miami is speaking for me. The way they would have understood it is that that Mike's not actually talking, it's the little image that's talking through his mouth. Okay, so the image signifies who you are representing. And what does God do? He makes us in his image. He makes us his little idol. His little image here on earth to represent him to the world. I have something here. Can you pass these out? Everybody take one. I'm wired here, so just pass them out through. Everybody take one. Don't look at it. Hold it upside down. When everybody has one, then we'll flip it around. But the idea of your territory being your dominion is something that's in our culture. We have our borders. That's not the way people in the Near East would have understood territory or dominion. They would have understood it by whoever you are following. So you could be living in Egypt and have a little idol of the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, and that meant you were actually a servant of Nebuchadnezzar, not a servant of Pharaoh. Wherever you were, whatever idol you had, whatever king you formed allegiance to, that's who you followed, not based on your territory. The idea of Revolutionary War in the United States was something that had been totally foreign to the Near Eastern idea of dominion. That you could have somebody in active rebellion to the crown and still be under the crown. They couldn't understand that. Now flip your papers over, and whatever they say, do. Some of you stood up, and some of you stayed sitting. Now, those of you sitting, what do you think the people who stood up, you have any idea what their papers might say?
Kingdom will stand up.
Kingdom will stand up? How about those of you standing? What do you think maybe the people that stayed sitting were, their papers say? Sit down, kingdom.
A lazy kingdom.
Lazy kingdom. Sit down, kingdom. So you know what? This illustrates how they would have understood kingdom. It had nothing to do with borders. It had to do with who is your king. And you sit down again. The sit down or stand up, you know what? That was all scattered around. It had nothing to do with borders. And they had an understanding that their kingdom had nothing to do with borders. Their understanding of kingdom was, who is the king that I'm going to follow? That's who I'm going to follow. So when we represent God, we might not be in God's territory, God's kingdom. We can be in a foreign country and still be a representative of God. We are ambassadors. That's how we were created. Ambassadors from heaven to earth to rule over the earth. And that's the position we still hold today. And we can get into that a little deeper if you want to in discussion time. But Paul refers to himself in the New Testament as ambassador over and over and over again. He understood this concept that as God's representatives, he's put on earth to represent God to the world around him. Both to the people as well as to the creation that God created. You know, we are doing what God designed for us to do when we care for his creation like his garden. Beth is worshiping God when she's outside caring for these plants. That's a form of worship when we care for his creation. Now, in this world, many people take that form of worship and they make it a god in themselves. They're going to care for the planet. Well, they're not because they're caring for God's creation, but because many times they're actually denying God's existence. They're going to create their own kingdom in this world, or what they're often aiming at. When we care for creation, we are actually worshiping God. When we care for others that are part of God's creation, we're also worshiping God. We're also taking that place that God designed for us to be. Okay, so reflecting God and representing God are the two keys of the creation account and of why we were created. Okay, we kind of went through all this. Kingdoms in Moses' time were allegiance-based or people-based. They were not territorial. And we need to reformat our thinking a little bit times, because most of the time, us in the West think of kingdoms as territorial, not as allegiance-based. Their idea was it's allegiance-based. And then, the second part, I jumped ahead here. Show your allegiance to the king. You would place a little image in your front yard or wherever. I imagine sometimes, probably if you were living down in Egypt and you decided you were going to have your allegiance to the king of Babylon, you might not display that image in your front yard. I'm thinking you might be a little bit hesitant to put that out on display. But at the same time, it often was okay for you to put that image on display. They understood. You're not listening to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh might get mad at it. He might come and chop your head off. But your neighbors, well, they follow Pharaoh. You follow Nebuchadnezzar. What's the difference? The kings would be the ones who would battle that on you. God made the image of himself, mankind, to rule in his place. God was not here on earth taking care of the Garden of Eden and everything else. He put mankind there to rule in his place. And that's the reason we were created, to represent and to reflect God. Okay, so Genesis chapter 2. We have almost a repeat of the event of when when Satan defected from God, rebelled against God, declared mutiny on God. We have almost a total thing happening all over again with mankind, with God's other creation. Adam and Eve joined in the same rebellion as Satan. You probably know the story, but there was two trees in the Garden of Eden. The one was the tree of life, the other was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God said you can eat of all the trees in the garden, including the tree of life, but you may not eat of the knowledge of good and evil. I want you to remain innocent and followers of me, representative of me. If you eat of that tree, it wasn't spoken so clearly to Adam, but the idea is if you eat of that tree, you will become like gods. You will have your own way mapped out. You will be able to do what you want to do. You have knowledge of good and evil, and you have the ability to think for yourself and rule your own kingdom. Satan jumps on that. And for the first part, when Satan tempts them, he says, yes, if you eat of this tree, you will become like gods, knowing good and evil. Totally true. They become like gods, knowing good and evil. They can chart their own course. They can make their own kingdom if they eat of this tree. And they chose to. They chose to go down that route, eat from that tree of knowledge of good and evil, form their own kingdom in rebellion to God. So God responds by putting them under curses or sanctions. We hear a lot about sanctions in this world, it seems. I don't know how many countries the United States has sanctions on right now, but it's a lot. Iran, Russia, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. What other countries do we have sanctions on? Or United States has sanctions? Lots of countries have sanctions on. Sanctions are designed for what reason? To make life difficult. So that the person who has the sanctions placed on them will see that the way that they're going is not the best way, and that if they choose to do what the person who put the sanctions on them wants them to do, they will have an easier life. So God puts the sanctions on Adam and Eve to make their life hard and difficult. He says, if you're going to go your own way, form your own kingdom, do what you want to do, then your life is going to be hard. I'm going to put these sanctions on you. While the pain and suffering is hard, it should give the person who is sanctioned, which is all of us, the idea that life is not perfect and it's not as it should be in this world. There is something that's supposed to be done that's not being done. That's what it's supposed to do. God would have been totally justified at that point in time. When mankind declared mutiny on God, he'd been totally justified in just wiping the earth clean, killing all humankind, Adam and Eve, stopping humankind right there. He was totally justified because he had active rebellion on his hands. And when a king has active rebellion on his hands, he is totally justified in going out and wiping that rebellion out. God chose not to. He chose instead to put the earth under sanctions, to call people back to him, back under his lordship. If Genesis chapter 5, if you have your Bibles, pull that out. I want to read something here that's, I think, is very interesting. Genesis chapter 5, it's the first little chapter, first little few verses. Genesis chapter 5 is a chapter that most of us skim over because it's a whole bunch of names. And we all love genealogies and reading these names we can't pronounce. But 1 through 5 is a little different. Verse 1, it says, "In the book of the genealogy of Adam, in the day that God created man, he made them in the likeness of God." Very similar phrase what we heard earlier. Image of God in the likeness of God. And he created them male and female, and blessed them and called them mankind in the day that they were created. And Adam lived 130 years, and begat a son in his own likeness, after his own image, and named him Seth. And after he begot Seth, the days of Adam were 800 years, and he had sons and daughters. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. The thing that I think is important to catch out of that is when God created mankind, he made them in the likeness of God, or in the image of God. He created them as male and female, and blessed them, and named them mankind when they were created. When Adam was 130 years old, he had a son in his own image. This was after he had rebelled against God. And so what happens, this son is in his own image, and he names him Seth. It's not the perfect image of God, it's the image of a person who has rebelled against God. That's what image Seth was created in. And so if you look at a mirror, and you look at the image of the mirror, you look in the mirror, you have an image of yourself, but before all of a sudden somebody runs in the room, takes a magic marker, and writes all over the mirror. Now your image is distorted, messed up, not looking right. That's what happened here. You have the perfect image of God. Somebody ran in, marked it all up, and Seth is made in that other image of a messed up reflection of God. Seth's descendants include many God-following people. There is still a sense that all is not well in the world. The world is messed up, and we are living in a world that has been put under sanctions because of disobedience, because of rebellion against God. I really don't like that. Like what we often use, we talk about the fall of mankind. Kind of like you slipped and fell. No, it was not a slip and fell. It was an active mutiny rebellion against God. They knew what they were doing, and they did it anyway. At least Adam knew what he was doing. Eve may have misled the seeds, but I think she knew that she was not supposed to eat that tree either. I think she had gotten that information. They were not just falling, slipped, oh man, I messed up, and now from now on I gotta live under sanctions of God. No, they were living in active rebellion to God. Story continues. Next couple weeks we're going to see the results of these sanctions on mankind. And a lot of times the results of the sanctions are not pretty. A lot of death, a lot of destruction, a lot of hardship because of the sanctions. That's what sanctions are designed to do. It's designed to make life hard so that you come under the authority of the person who is putting the sanctions on you. That's what sanctions are supposed to do. If the sanctions are easy, then they're not adequate because they have a purpose, putting pain out in order to bring you back under the lordship of the person who put the sanctions on. But God continues to call people to place himself under his rule. Even through the sanctions, he's saying, come and follow me. Come and follow me. Put yourself under my rule again. Some people did submit to God's rule, and when they did, God restored them at least part of the ambassadorship that they were commissioned for. Nobody today is fully restored to that ambassadorship. I say that carefully because some people could say, well, yes, actually we are, but I'm going to say, no, we're not fully restored. And the reason is our bodies still deteriorate. And our bodies, a totally restored ambassadorship, our bodies would not deteriorate. We still are under sanctions. Our bodies are under sanctions. So that means we're not totally restored to the ambassadorship. But we still have the ambassadorship given to us to represent God to the world and reflect God to the world. Most people continue in this mutiny against God, and most people choose to blame God for the sanctions he placed them under. Now, in the last year, I doubt when the people of Russia complain about not having something they had before, like McDonald's. No McDonald's in Russia anymore. And if they complain to Putin about, we lost McDonald's, I don't think Putin is going to say, yeah, you lost McDonald's, it's all our fault. If we wouldn't have invaded Ukraine, we'd still have McDonald's. That's not what Putin's going to say. Putin's going to say, yeah, we lost McDonald's, it's their fault. They should not have done that to us. Most people in this world blame God for the sanctions and for the results of sanctions rather than say, we are the ones that are blamed for these sanctions. That's, you say, human nature. What is our normal way of dealing with sanctions? But when we see hard times, when we can't get our McDonald's, when we get sick, we ought to say, we are to blame for this, rather than God is to blame for this. Because God would have been totally justified making sanctions any way he wants. He would have been totally justified killing everyone out there. Because there's active rebellion on his hands. I'm totally justified doing that. So we ought to take the blame for it instead of blaming God for it. Okay, we're going to go into questions and comments. So I will step down and Fabian come up here. You're going to come up for takeover. And as we look at God's creation and the sanctions that God put us under, yes, it might be hard to think